Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition and the Path Builder app. Folks, it is a Freaky Friday, but not in the body switching sense. Nope, this week's subject is just a freaky little dude, Voldo from Soul Calibur. This was one of my brother's favorite characters back in the day, but I wouldn't say I hated the guy so much as I just thought he was a creep. However, I thought he could make for an interesting build after a buddy of mine pointed out an interaction to me, so let's take a look at his build goals. Voldo is a playable character in the Soul series of fighting games, known for wielding a pair of guitars, fighting with a self-taught contortionism style, and being a weirdo. In fact, I had always thought he was some sort of inhuman abomination, and in the course of researching for this build, I found out that I was right. He is an Italian.
Mamma mia!
The servant of a weapons merchant, Voldo mostly serves as the guard to his late master's vault, the Money Pit. Within the darkness of the pit, he has lost his sight, but his other senses have been heightened to compensate. His fighting style makes him extremely unpredictable, and has a few stances to it. He can fight facing forwards, backwards, or even crawling upon all fours in what is known as the Mantis Crawl. He uses a variety of grabs and low attacks to knock enemies off balance before delivering attacks while they're vulnerable. Finally, his critical finish is the Great Gear of Madness, which sees him cling to an enemy, roll around with them, and then slam them into the ground. With those goals established, let's step over the edge and get into the soul of the silent, sinister Slayer. To truly capture Voldo's freakiness, this build uses the Flesh Warp ancestry, and will draw upon the mutated heritage, reflecting the change that he underwent during his lifetime instead of being forcibly altered. I feel like created could also work, mostly just because as somebody that lives down in the cold, dark money pit, I feel like he'd have some resistance to disease. He will take Living Weapon as his ancestry feat to gain a set of claws, which is actually how we'll be representing his guitars for this build, because, as a bit of a spoiler, he's not going to use them normally. With his role as a guard for his master in the Money Pit, Voldo will take up that background, settling on warfare lore since his boss was a weapons merchant. It also makes him trained in intimidation, which will give him quick coercion. This ends up being a little weird since Voldo doesn't actually talk, but we'll roll with it. In what might not be a surprise for a character from a fighting game, Voldo uses the Monk class. Now, before we go into discussing what this gives him, I want to talk about the guitar-less build. As I've mentioned, Voldo uses quite a few trips and grapples, while also appearing fairly agile in his fighting style. However, both forms of guitars in Pathfinder lack the finesse trait and the freehand trait, which means he can make use of dexterity or those maneuvers. So instead, to include those facets of the character while also matching his unpredictable and confounding combat contortionism, he takes Stumbling Stance as his class feat. As a huge fan of The Legend of the Drunken Boxer, this is a stance that I love and I'm happy to finally make use of, though I understand that some of you might find its use a bit controversial. Despite the naysaying I'm sure you're spouting right now, I shall soldier on. As part of that, I want to establish that Voldo is blind. So, much like the Toph build, and as suggested in page 487 of the Pathfinder Second Edition core rulebook, he'll be granted an early blind fight feat. As for skills, he'll be trained in acrobatics, athletics, deception, and stealth. With his fighting style, he'll focus on dexterity, but strength isn't bad to help bolster his damage, and charisma will help him pull off some trickery. In what is becoming a bit of a trend for these builds, Voldo takes a rogue dedication for his second level class feat, which will make him trained in thievery and occultism, while also netting him the surprise attack class feature, possibly letting him make use of his stance backstabber traits. This archetype also gives him a skill feat, meaning that he has 2 for this level. Quick Jump is a classically handy skill feat, especially for a martial character, but Reed Psychometric Resonance might seem a stranger pick. This is intended as a reference to the sometimes preternatural ability he demonstrates to sense his master's stolen treasures and hunt them down. At 3rd level, he'll take Fleet as his general feat, which will stack with his incredible movement to make a super speedy stranger. He'll start his skill increase with a boost to acrobatics to become an expert in it. He took Quick Jump last time, so for his 4th level class feat he'll pick up Flying Kick, as that is just a pretty standard maneuver within the Soul series, and I guess fighting games in general. Strangely, his skill feat might actually be more important here, as he takes up Nimble Crawl, which will eventually come to help represent Voldo's Mantis Crawl stance, especially as he becomes a legend in acrobatics. Voldo takes Uncanny Awareness as his 5th level ancestry feat to play into the heightened senses he developed after losing his vision in the dark of the Money Pit. This time around, he'll become an expert in athletics, which will help him pull off some of those maneuvers that he demonstrates. Whirling Throw at 6th level is meant to stand in for the ground slam Voldo does as part of his Great Gear of Madness, as well as a few of his other grabs and throws. He also takes up Titan Wrestler, since we've seen him body around people that are likely quadruple his bulk, such as Astaroth. Keeping with the agility and surprising grace of this creepy carver of conspiring crooks, he grabs Feather Step for his general feat at 7th level, to allow him to step into difficult terrain. Matching this, he takes his first Path to Perfection in Reflex, increasing it to Master. His acrobatics skill also increases to Master from his level skill increase. For his 8th level class feat, he can take up flurry maneuvers to match the trips and grabs that he weaves into his surprising sinister style that serves alongside his subtle strikes. Furthermore, at this point, Voldo can now crawl at his full speed thanks to Nimble Crawl. He complements this with Kip Up as his skill feat so that he can drop prone, skid around and Mantis Crawl at full monk speed, and then pop back up as a free action with this feat. Voldo can expand on his Living Weapon Ancestry feat with the Mutate Weapon Ancestry feat at 9th level. Like I said, this is the closest this build will come to using his Katars, which he can enhance through this feat. He also increases his Athletics to Master with his skill increase. There were a couple of feats that he needed to get first, but at 10th level, Voldo can take Sneak Attacker to dish out some additional damage whenever his Backstabber trait would also allow him to do so. He takes Quick Squeeze as his skill feat just to stick with his general eeriness. Now this build is certainly slippery, but still needs some safety, which leads to him taking Toughness as his general feat at 11th level. Before talking about his skills, we'll take a Path to Perfection to Fortitude, mostly because he's shown some susceptibility to mental predations. Then his skill increase goes to Deception this time around, boosting it to Expert. This Deception increase in turn directly plays into Stumbling Feint, just because I really love the action compression that it grants him. 1 action for a feint and 2 strikes? That is just too good. He can also make more use out of Deception with his Fleeing Diversion, simply to sow Stupefaction. He gets even more action compression with Slip the Grasp as his 13th level Ancestry feat, which also fits with his capability as a Contortionist. He follows that up with a skill increase to Deception to become a master in it. 14th level will grant Voldo Basic Trickery as a class feat, which will lead into Tumble Behind, letting him use his acrobatics while also exploiting Sneak Attacker and Backstabber, and then also just fitting into how he sometimes rolls around the battlefield. Following Slip the Grasp, he'll take Slippery Prey as his skill feat, so that he can slide free of restraints with even greater ease. Our violent and voguing Voldo veers into a generally useful feat with Fast Recovery at 15th level, and then becomes a legend in his reflex saves through his Path to Perfection. Naturally, his first skill to be increased to Legendary will be his Acrobatics skill, which means, thanks to Nimble Crawl, that he's no longer off guard while prone. Voldo seems to have a number of moves to punish people that he's put down, which he can demonstrate with Advanced Trickery and a Head Stomp at 16th level. Despite being a rogue feat, it fits really nicely with his build as a monk, and will let him keep foes off balance for quite a while. Sadly, there isn't really a legendary level acrobatics skill, so he'll take Lengthy Diversion to take advantage of his Deception instead. And again, I'd probably just flavor this as him simply perplexing his adversaries. For similar reasons as taking Uncanny Awareness earlier, Voldo takes up Augment Senses as his 17th level Ancestry feat, befitting both the enhanced senses he demonstrates and his capability at fighting enemies at his back. I think the skill increase here could go to either Athletics or Deception, whichever you feel you use more, and whatever you don't increase at this level will get boosted to Legendary at 19th instead. Another Advanced Trickery at 18th level lets him pick up the harder they fall. This is something he can take advantage of with his flurry of maneuvers and just add some extra damage in there while he's already debilitating enemies. I think Catfall is a good skill feat, but it's also kind of ironic to take because he's as susceptible to ring outs as anybody else within the Souls games. To help him make better use out of his Surprise Attack class feature, Voldo will take up Incredible Initiative for his 19th level General feat to get that tiny boost going. And like I said with that last skill increase, go for either Athletics or Deception, whichever one you don't have at Legendary already. Voldo is one of the more nimble characters in Soul Calibur, and to represent this he takes Enduring Quickness at 20th level, becoming permanently quickened on top of his crazy 60-foot movement speed. Imagine that just crawling at you. He'll take up Wall Jump as his last skill feat just because, and then becomes trained in Medicine based on a boost to his intelligence. If you were to take Voldo into a free archetype game, it's mainly going to let him dive deeper into the rogue archetype, likely taking up options such as Opportune Backstab, Skirmish Strike, Nimble Dodge, and Overextending Feint. Beyond that, you could probably look into possibly going for the Bounty Hunter dedication, given his hunting down of thieves that have stolen from the Money Pit. Fortunately for me, we're about finished with this freaky fella, but let's go ahead and review what we've built so far. Voldo is a mutated Fleshwarp monk, with the guard background to represent his considerable time spent as the guardian of the Money Pit. This build, in a possibly controversial move, forgoes taking his Katars to instead emulate his bizarre contortionist style with the stumbling stance. This allows him to throw enemies off guard even as they successfully strike him. He lost his vision in the dark of the Money Pit, and he'll use Blind Fight, as described in the Pathfinder Second Edition core rulebook, page 487. But he can also take up Augment Senses and Uncanny Awareness to further explore this option. He expands on his unpredictable style with Stumbling Feint and choices such as Nimble Crawl and Kip Up to move around, which in particular helps to imitate his Mantis Crawl. Flurry maneuvers and sticking with unarmed combat keeps Voldo able to perform grapples, trips, and the like, which he will expand upon with feats such as Whirling Throw, Head Stomp, and the Harder They Fall, while flurry maneuvers can help him land them in the first place. His Great Gear Madness is probably best represented by a flurry of maneuvers that leads with a grapple, a couple of stumbling swing strikes, and then a whirling throw, which fortunately doesn't have the attack trait. This abomination of an acrobatic assassin absolutely annihilates avaricious adversaries with agile attacks, angling abnormal antics at his antagonists. If you would like to check out a breakdown for the build that includes item suggestions and a fuller exploration of its use in a free archetype game, consider checking out the blog. That, along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord, are linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic Friday.